She left him on my doorstep with nothing but a teddy bear and a promise she'd be back Sunday. Sunday never came. 15 years later, that same boy, my grandson, sat in court, facing his mother again. She came to take back everything she'd abandoned. But this time, the truth was on his side, and it spoke louder than any lie ever could. The abandonment. Vivian had never been one to leave her front porch light on after dark, but that evening in 2010, the glow refused to die. It burned quietly through the fog, casting a soft halo around the boy standing on her doorstep, Ethan. He clutched a frayed teddy bear, his wide eyes reflecting the light like glass marbles. Behind him, Rachel's car engine hummed impatiently. "Mom," Rachel said, voice trembling between exhaustion and guilt. "I just need the weekend. I'll come back Sunday. I promise." Vivian looked at her daughter, her lipstick faded, her blouse wrinkled from hours of driving, and felt the air tighten in her chest. "Rachel, wait! What's going on? You can't just—" But the sentence dissolved into the night. Rachel kissed Ethan's head with a trembling whisper, then got into her car. The red taillights bled into the mist, then vanished. The sound of the engine faded long before Vivian realized she was still standing barefoot on the cold wooden porch, her hand frozen midair. Inside, the house felt too quiet. The ticking clock was suddenly loud, almost violent. Ethan sat by the door, his small fingers tracing the cracks in the floorboard. He didn't cry. He didn't ask for his mother. He just stared at the wall with an expression too still for a child. The first days were chaos. Vivian tried to speak to him gently at first, then pleadingly. "Ethan, sweetheart, are you hungry?" No response. "Would you like milk?" He turned his head away, curling into his blanket on the couch. He wouldn't eat, wouldn't sleep unless every light was off, and would scream if the kettle whistled. Once, when a bird landed too close to the window, the sudden flutter of wings sent him into a storm of tears and trembling hands. Vivian held him tight, whispering, "It's all right, baby. It's just the wind." But his little body shook like it was breaking. By the third day, she found herself in the kitchen, phone pressed to her ear, begging Rachel to pick up. When the call went to voicemail, she left a message that started calm and ended in tears. "Rachel, he needs you. I don't know what I'm doing. Please, please call me." But the phone never rang again. Weeks passed, and the silence in the house became its own language. Vivian started to learn its grammar. Ethan would only eat toast cut into perfect squares. He needed the same blue cup every morning. If she moved the vase in the living room even an inch, he would notice, and his breathing would quicken, as if the world itself had tilted off balance. So she stopped moving things. She learned to follow his rhythms, the way he lined up his toy cars, how he flinched at the creak of the hallway floor. Every sound, every movement had to be predictable. For him, chaos was pain. One morning, she found him humming a low, fragile sound, like a radio between stations. She froze at the kitchen doorway, afraid to break the spell. It wasn't a song she knew, but it was something. His voice was small, trembling, but alive. And in that moment, she realized he wasn't lost. He was trying to find his way back. The neighbors started talking. Mrs. Doyle, from across the street, came by with muffins and questions. "Is Rachel coming to get him soon?" she asked, eyes darting toward Ethan, who sat in the corner with his teddy bear. Vivian forced a smile. "Soon," she lied. "Just sorting things out?" But as the months turned to years, the lie hardened into truth of another kind. Rachel's postcards stopped. The only letter that ever arrived was a short note written in shaky handwriting. "I can't do it, Mom. I'm sorry." Vivian read it once, twice, then folded it neatly and tucked it into her Bible. That night, she didn't cry. Instead, she sat beside Ethan as he fell asleep, his small hand resting in hers. The soft rhythm of his breathing filled the room, steady, fragile, and achingly real. There were small victories that only she and Ethan would ever understand. The day he looked at her for more than 3 seconds. The first time he laughed a sudden, high-pitched giggle when she accidentally dropped flour all over the counter. She laughed too, surprised by the sound of joy she hadn't heard in years. They stood there, covered in white dust, both laughing until her sides ached. For a brief, impossible moment, it felt like grace had visited the house. Sometimes, when she walked him to the park, the world seemed to soften around them. Ethan liked the swings, but only if she pushed at the same slow pace, counting under her breath 1, 2, 3, pause, 1, 2, 3. If another child ran too close or the wind shifted suddenly, he'd clutch the chain tight and whisper, "Stop," and she always did. Years later, when Ethan was 8, the phone rang. The voice on the other end was Rachel's thin, tired, unfamiliar. "Mom," she said, "I just wanted to hear your voice." Vivian didn't speak for a long moment. "You left him," she finally whispered. "Do you know what that did to him?" "To me?" "I know," Rachel said. "I was drowning. I thought maybe you could save him, because I couldn't." Vivian's eyes filled, but her voice was calm. "He's not someone to be saved, Rachel. He's someone to be loved." Silence. Then the line went dead. She never heard from her again. Now, years later, the house has grown quieter, but no longer lonely. The porch light still glows each night, a silent promise that no one will ever be left waiting again. Ethan, now a young boy with bright eyes and gentle hands, still hums the same soft tune as he lines up his toy cars. Vivian sits nearby, knitting, occasionally glancing at him with a smile that carries both pride and sorrow. Every day is still a careful choreography: toast squares, blue cup, and morning walk. But beneath the repetition lies something sacred, a love rebuilt from the wreckage of abandonment, a rhythm that both of them have learned to keep. And when evening falls, Vivian sometimes stands by the window, watching the shadows stretch across Maplewood Street, whispering to the quiet, "You were never too much to love, my boy." The wind rustles the curtains in reply, soft, steady, and kind. The years of learning and discovery. By the time the maple tree outside turned its leaves to gold, Ethan had grown into a quiet, observant child whose world ran on patterns. Every morning began the same way: oatmeal, with precisely 6 blueberries, socks lined in even folds, the walk to Maplewood Elementary along the same cracks in the sidewalk. Vivian used to think of routine as dull. Now she saw it as sacred. Inside her modest kitchen, the soft hum of the refrigerator blended with Ethan's voice counting under his breath, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. He arranged his toy cars across the table, each one forming a perfect gradient of color. Red bled into orange, orange into yellow, yellow into green. Vivian smiled from behind her cup of tea. "You've made quite the parade, Professor," she teased. Ethan glanced up briefly, his eyes bright behind the curtain of his dark hair. "They can't go until the colors make sense," he said simply. "Of course not," she replied with a grin. "We wouldn't want a red car cutting in line before blue. That'd be chaos." He almost smiled, just a flicker, then returned to his task with quiet determination. Vivian had learned early that laughter was her bridge to him, teasing gently, never too loud. It wasn't the kind of laughter that filled a room. It was the kind that warmed it slowly, like sunlight through a thin curtain. As the years passed, their little house filled with signs of learning. Notebooks with endless patterns, sheets of numbers and tiny sketches that looked like codes. Ethan found beauty in order. He saw patterns in clouds, rhythm in rainfall, equations in the flight of birds. One afternoon, she came home from the grocery store to find him sitting at the table with a ruler and a notebook, drawing lines that intersected perfectly. "What's all this?" she asked, setting down a bag of apples. He didn't look up. "Maps," he said softly. Of sounds. Of sounds? He nodded. When the church bell rings, it echoes here. He tapped a point on the paper. And when the dog barks, it echoes here. Another point. If I close my eyes, I can see where everything belongs. Vivian felt her throat tighten. The boy who once feared sound now charted it like a scientist. That's incredible, Ethan, she whispered. You're hearing the world better than most people ever could. He shrugged, but a faint blush crept into his cheeks. It just makes sense. School, however, did not make sense. The first parent-teacher conference ended with Vivian gripping her purse so tightly her knuckles turned white. Mrs. Langley, said Mrs. Peterson, the young teacher with perfect hair and a practiced smile. Ethan is very bright, exceptionally so, but he doesn't well participate. He doesn't play with the other children. He prefers to organize things. Organize? Vivian asked. Yes. The books, the crayons, the lunch trays. It's sweet, but it's unusual. Vivian straightened her shoulders. He likes order. It helps him feel safe. I understand, Mrs. Peterson said carefully, but perhaps he'd thrive more in a specialized environment. We have a program that focuses on social development rather than academic rigor. Vivian's voice cooled. My grandson's test scores are above average in every subject. Yes, but then he stays, Vivian said, rising from her chair. He stays where he can be challenged. Mrs. Peterson blinked, caught between politeness and protest. Of course, if that's what you prefer. It's what he deserves, Vivian said firmly, gathering her coat. Outside, the afternoon sunlight shimmered through the trees, and she exhaled shakily. Ethan stood by the fence waiting, holding a leaf in his hand like a small victory flag. Did you win? He asked, his voice calm, almost knowing. Vivian smiled. We always do, don't we? He nodded once, satisfied, and slipped his small hand into hers. Their bond deepened through small rituals, evening tea, quiet jokes about the neighbors, debates over which cloud looked most like a dinosaur. He started teasing her in his own way, dry, literal humor that caught her off guard. Grandma, he said once as she burned a batch of cookies, you've invented new physics, the one where chocolate evaporates. She burst out laughing. Oh, you cheeky scientist, he tilted his head. I think you mean genius baker. It was impossible not to laugh again. In those moments, their home no longer felt haunted by loss. It pulsed with the gentle rhythm of a life rebuilt. When Ethan was 9, the question finally came sudden and sharp as a crack in glass. He had been writing quietly in his notebook, filling pages with symbols that looked like constellations. Without looking up, he asked, Why did my mother leave? Vivian froze, the dish towel slipping from her hands. For 3 years she had prepared for this question and dreaded it in equal measure. She turned slowly. What makes you ask that, sweetheart? He looked up for the first time, eyes steady. Because everyone else's mother picks them up from school, and mine doesn't. Vivian took a deep breath, kneeling beside him. Your mother, she loved you very much, but sometimes love isn't enough to fix what's broken inside a person. Ethan frowned. So she was broken? Yes, she said softly. But not because of you. Never because of you. He was silent for a long time, then whispered, I think she forgot my pattern. Vivian blinked back tears. Maybe she did, my love, but I never will. He nodded, seeming to accept it. Then, quietly, okay. Can I finish my map now? She smiled through the ache in her chest. Yes, darling, you finish your map. By middle school, Ethan's world had expanded computers, data, logic puzzles. He devoured anything with structure and precision. Vivian would sometimes find him typing furiously on an old laptop, strings of numbers glowing across the screen. What on earth are you building now? She asked. A sorter, he said. For what? For everything. he replied matter-of-factly. Names, dates, sounds, colors. If I can sort them, they stop spinning. Spinning? He hesitated, then looked at her. Sometimes the world spins too fast, but when I put things in order, it slows down. Vivian brushed a strand of hair from his forehead. You're building peace out of numbers, she murmured. He smiled faintly. Maybe. At school, teachers began to notice what Vivian already knew: the boy's mind was extraordinary. He solved patterns that stumped his classmates, corrected mistakes in textbooks, even helped the librarian catalog the entire collection alphabetically twice. But not everyone saw brilliance. Some only saw difference. There were whispers, odd, quiet, difficult. Vivian heard them but chose silence as her answer. She had learned that dignity could be louder than defense. After one particularly hard week, when a group of boys mocked Ethan for repeating his routines, she found him sitting in the backyard under the old oak tree, his notebook open but untouched. Rough day? She asked softly. He nodded. They said I'm weird. Vivian sat beside him. You are, she said with a small smile. Wonderfully weird. The kind of weird that changes the world. He looked at her, puzzled, then grinned a rare, genuine grin. You think so? I know so. He leaned his head lightly against her shoulder. Then, I guess I'll keep being weird. She laughed, wrapping an arm around him. Good. The world needs more of it. By the time he reached his teenage years, Ethan's curiosity had turned to mastery. He began helping Vivian organize her lesson plans from her old teaching days, building digital systems to store and retrieve every file. Look, he said proudly, one evening, showing her a color-coded interface. You can search by subject, year, or student name. Instant results. Vivian stared at the screen in awe. You've made a database, Ethan. You've built order out of memory. He looked thoughtful. It's just patterns, Grandma. Everything has one. She placed a hand over his. So do people, you know. He raised an eyebrow. People are messy data. Vivian laughed. Maybe, but sometimes the most beautiful patterns come from the messiest pieces. Outside, the maple leaves whispered in the wind. Inside, a grandmother and her grandson sat side by side, one finding meaning in chaos, the other finding faith in him. And somewhere in that quiet house on Maplewood Street, the years of pain had begun to transform not into perfection, but into a pattern of love that finally made sense. The signs of genius. It started with a hand-me-down laptop that wheezed like an accordion whenever it booted. Vivian set it on the kitchen table beside a chipped mug and a saucer of oatmeal cookies, as if snacks might coax it into cooperation. The sticker on the lid read, Maplewood Public Schools Retired, and the screen bled a thin blue line down the left edge. Careful with it, she said, hovering. It's older than the toaster. Ethan, 12 now, patted the keyboard as if greeting a skittish animal. I'll be gentle. His voice had a quiet smile tucked into it. He'd spent the last month organizing her lesson binders into a neat digital catalog. Now he wanted to teach the computer a language. Python, he said, like it were a friendly pet snake. The first time he wrote hello, the machine replied in plain gray letters. He stared at the word like it had just waved at him. Grandma, he said, almost reverent. It listened. It did, she said, delighted. Ask nicely. It might make you tea. His lips twitched. That's Java. From there, he fell headlong. Loops, lists, dictionaries. He read documentation the way other kids devoured comic books, pencil tapping a steady rhythm as he pieced together a private grammar of logic and patience. The house filled with the soft percussion of keys and the hush of his counting then, Thena, metronome, for thinking. On Saturdays, they walked to Hawthorne Public Library. Mrs. Alvarez at the front desk started keeping aside books with spines that smelled like dust and electricity, Introduction to Algorithms, Data Integrity in the Digital Age, Cryptography for Curious Minds. She'd lean over and whisper, "For your boy," with a conspiratorial wink. One rainy afternoon, he came home with a stack taller than his forearms and a question that seemed to sit inside him like a pebble in a shoe. "How do you know something is real?" he asked. "When it's on a screen." Vivian glanced up from chopping carrots. "Real as in true? True as in unchanged." He set the books down. "Precise as always. If a file says this is the truth, how do we know it hasn't been nudged?" "Nudged?" she echoed, smiling. "You mean messed with?" He nodded. A little change. A dot moved. A number turned. No one notices, but everything shifts. She wiped her hands on a towel and looked at him, this boy who once trembled at the kettle whistle, now interrogating the nature of truth with the calm of a watchmaker. "That's a good question," she said softly. "Maybe you'll be the one to answer it." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he opened the laptop and began to type. Days gathered around a problem like chairs pulled close to a table. Ethan wrote a small program that watched files the way he watched the world. Quietly, relentlessly, with care. He taught it to take a kind of fingerprint from a documenta hash. He explained so that if a single pixel, a letter, even a space changed, the fingerprint would change too. He wrote the date, wrote the time, linked that fingerprint to the one before, like the way you tie a knot, and then another, and another. So if one loosens, the whole rope tells you where. It wasn't a wall. Walls can be climbed. It was a memory that refused to forget. At dinner, he tried to make the idea edible. Imagine, Grandma, you're knitting. Each row remembers the one before. If someone unravels part of it and re-knits with a different color, the pattern tattles. Vivian smiled. So it's a very honest sweater. Exactly. He didn't call it blockchain. He didn't need the word. He called it a ledger of promises in his notebook, and Vivian kept turning the phrase over in her mouth like a lozenge that soothed something she hadn't known was sore. He tested the code on everything he could get permission to touch. The church newsletter, the PTA minutes, a trove of scanned birth certificates at Kensington Copy and Mail, where Mr. Patel let him play intern after school in exchange for sorting toner cartridges and aligning the laminator that everyone else hated. "This one," Ethan would say, tapping a screen. Someone moved a comma 3 days after the printing deadline. Mr. Patel squinted. "A comma? Small things matter," Ethan said. "They're the easiest to hide." On Maplewood Street, word drifted the way scents Doslow, certain, impossible to ignore. Mrs. Doyle brought banana bread and a request. Could Ethan show her how to tell if the contracts her nephew sent for the roofing job had been tampered with? He stood at the table with his laptop, built a tiny trail of fingerprints across each PDF, and wrote a simple report in soft, plain English. No changes detected after signature. Mrs. Doyle pressed a hand to her chest. "You're a lighthouse, dear," she said, and the boy reddened like sunrise. Not everyone got it. At school, when he asked to present his project for the science fair, a counselor frowned at the rubric. "We're looking for something more, visible, like a volcano." "A volcano tells you where the fire is," Ethan said gently. "This tells you who lit the match." Vivian attended the fair anyway, standing beside his trifold display while younger siblings drifted past, drawn to the papier-mâché planets and jars of brine shrimp. A thin boy in a hoodie stopped to read, lips moving. "So," he murmured, "if my brother changes my essay and says I wrote it, the ledger would know," Ethan said. The boy nodded, suddenly fierce. "Cool." That evening, Vivian poured tea and watched him watch his code. "You look like a conductor," she said, listening for a violin that's out of tune. He tilted his head. "More like a librarian who knows which book is lying." She laughed, then sobered. "Do books lie?" People do, he said, not unkindly, sometimes because they're scared. The next week, Principal Myers called. There had been an issue with scholarship applications, 12 essays suspiciously similar, a deadline extension that appeared and disappeared like a trick of light. Would Ethan be willing to look? With permission granted and hands washed of anything secret, he ran his ledger across the documents. It hummed a quiet judgment. Timestamps didn't match. The trail skipped a beat where it should have sung. Myers listened, then exhaled into the phone. You just saved us from a mess, son. Ethan set the phone down carefully. Vivian watched him, feeling something she could only describe as awe braided with ache. The boy who once mapped the echo of a dog bark was now mapping the echo of human choices. Does it make you feel powerful? She asked, half teasing, half afraid. He thought for a long beat. No. It makes me feel responsible. Like I'm holding a mirror and asking, are you sure? She reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. You have the gentlest mirror I've ever seen. There were still afternoons of ordinary teasing. When she mislabeled a folder on her desktop, he tapped the screen. Grandma, your chaos is showing. She stuck out her tongue. It's my artistic period. Then your artist needs version control. Fine, Professor Version Control. Fix it and I'll bake pie. He paused, as if weighing ethics against pastry. Open the oven. In the quiet after laughter, Vivian sometimes caught him staring at the little blue progress bar, listening to the soft tick of code doing what it was told. The porch light would come on, casting its familiar halo across the room, and something in her chest would steady. She didn't understand all the language hash chains, signatures, entropy, but she understood the heart of it. Once, he had needed the world to repeat itself so it wouldn't hurt him. Now he was building a way for the world to tell the truth so it wouldn't hurt others. Ethan, she whispered one night as he closed the laptop. Do you know what you're making? He shrugged, shy again. A way to remember. She brushed his hair back. You're making trust, sweetheart. Outside, the neighborhood folded into evening. Inside, the old laptop purred, and the ledger of promises kept writing its quiet, stubborn line knot to knot, truth to truth across the pages of a boy's becoming. Success and the return. By 15, Ethan had outgrown the house on Maplewood Street in the strangest way, not in size, but in reach. His ideas now spilled from that old laptop into the world beyond it. When the pandemic swept through town and the streets went silent, his mind only grew louder. The boy who once counted cracks on the sidewalk now counted possibilities in data streams, linking patterns the way others linked constellations. Vivian would watch from the kitchen as he hunched over his desk, the glow of 3 monitors painting his face in shifting blues. You'll turn into a computer if you don't step outside, she'd tease. He grinned without looking up. Computers don't need sunscreen. Well, you do, she said, placing a plate of toast beside him. And a haircut. Haircuts are optional in quarantine, he murmured, eyes flicking between lines of code. Integrity isn't. She rolled her eyes. You sound like an old man. He smiled faintly. Maybe I'm catching up to you. By midsummer, he'd done it. The program, the one that had begun as a humble ledger of promises, had evolved into something breathtakingly precise. A data authentication system that could verify the truth of any digital document using adaptive encryption and predictive pattern mapping. He called it True Key. When he ran his final test, the screen displayed a single line, Integrity confirmed. Vivian found him standing by the window, staring at the rain. It works, he said softly. She tilted her head. You say that like you've just landed on the moon. Maybe I did, he replied. Just a digital one. News traveled fast, even faster than Ethan's code. A cybersecurity firm from Boston, North Arc Technologies, reached out. They'd seen his prototype demo in an online forum. 2 weeks of negotiations later, Ethan, barely tall enough to look over the conference table in the video call, sold his software for $3.2 million. When the local news aired, the story "Teen Developer Creates Breakthrough Verification System Amid Pandemic," Vivian watched it from the couch, her hand trembling around a mug of cocoa. The reporter smiled too brightly. The anchor used words like prodigy and visionary. But all Vivian could see was the boy who used to line up toy cars by color, now sitting across from her, cross-legged, sipping orange juice as if nothing had changed. "Well," she said, voice soft, "I suppose I live with a millionaire now." He shrugged. "Technically, we share a Wi-Fi plan." Vivian laughed through a tear. Always practical. 2 weeks later, the doorbell rang. Vivian opened the door to find Rachel standing there, older, sharper, wearing a tailored blazer and holding a leather folder. Behind her stood a man in a gray suit with a polite but predatory smile. "Mom," Rachel said, as if no years had passed. "It's been a while." Vivian's throat closed. "Rachel," she breathed. "You how?" "I heard about Ethan," she interrupted. "Congratulations. I'm proud." The lawyer cleared his throat. "Mrs. Langley, my name is Paul Danner. I represent Miss Rachel Langley in a matter concerning guardianship and financial management." Vivian blinked. "Guardianship? Financial, what are you talking about?" Rachel stepped forward, sliding a packet of papers onto the hall table. "According to these records, I never relinquished my parental rights. I've been sending financial support through a custodial fund, which, it seems, you've neglected to acknowledge." Vivian's face drained of color. "That's not true. You left him on my doorstep. I left him in your care," Rachel said smoothly. "Temporarily. You never filed for legal custody. That means I still have it." The lawyer adjusted his glasses. "Given Ethan's recent financial success, it's imperative that his legal guardian manage his estate responsibly. My client intends to resume her rightful role as both mother and custodian of assets." Vivian's hands trembled. "You forged this, didn't you? You can't just—" From behind them, a calm voice interrupted. "Let her talk." They turned. Ethan stood at the end of the hallway, barefoot, his hair a little too long, his expression unreadable. He walked forward slowly, his eyes fixed on Rachel, the woman whose absence had defined his life. Rachel's practiced composure faltered. "Ethan," she said softly, "you've grown so much. I've missed you, sweetheart." He looked at her for a long moment, then sat down at the dining table. "You forged those documents," he said simply. Rachel stiffened. "Excuse me?" He motioned to the papers. "You used a scanned signature from a hospital intake form dated June 2011. The ink pattern doesn't match the timestamps. And the notary seal was discontinued in 2015. The lawyer frowned. "That's quite an accusation, young man." Ethan met his gaze, calm as still water. "It's not an accusation. It's verification. My system flagged it." Vivian turned to him stunned. "You checked?" "I check everything," he said quietly. Rachel's voice sharpened. "You think you're smarter than your own mother?" "No," he replied, just more honest. A flicker of heat flashed in her eyes. "I gave you life, and then you disappeared from it," he said. "For 11 years. The silence that followed was deep enough to hear the hum of the refrigerator. The lawyer began gathering the papers. "We'll review this further," he muttered, avoiding Ethan's gaze. Rachel hesitated, her mask cracking, then turned toward the door. Before she could leave, Ethan spoke again, his tone softer now. "You could have come back for me, you know, before the money." Rachel's hand froze on the doorknob. "I was just a kid," he continued. "I would have forgiven you." Vivian pressed a hand to her heart. Rachel didn't turn around. "I did what I thought was best," she whispered, and left. The sound of the door closing echoed through the house, not loud, but final. That night, Vivian sat beside Ethan in the living room, the TV flickering silently. The news anchor's voice was muted, but Ethan's face glowed on the screen in the background, a photograph from his interview smiling back at them. Vivian turned to him. "You okay?" He nodded. "Yeah, she'll try again," Vivian said quietly. "I know." He looked down at his hands, long, careful fingers that had learned to build order out of chaos. "She thought she could lie her way back," he said. "But truth keeps receipts." Vivian couldn't help a soft laugh, tears gathering anyway. "You sound like your grandfather when you say things like that." Ethan smiled faintly. "Guess it's genetic." She brushed his hair back gently. "You didn't even raise your voice." "There was no need," he said, turning to meet her eyes. "People who build walls out of lies are already trapped inside them." She exhaled slowly, pride and grief tangled in her chest. "You're still just 15, she whispered. He smiled, small and sad. "Yeah, but 15 feels older when you remember everything." Outside, the world was still. The porch light glowed as it always had, steady, unwavering, a quiet symbol of the promise that had begun all those years ago. And in that quiet, as rain began to tap softly against the window, Vivian realized that Ethan's greatest invention was not his software, nor the money, nor even the fame. It was the peace that comes from knowing what's true, and the courage to stand there when truth speaks for itself. The legal battle. The courthouse on Ashbury Avenue smelled faintly of paper and lemon cleaner, like a school trying too hard to behave. Vivian smoothed the front of her navy dress, the same one she wore to church on Easter, and tried to steady her hands. Beside her, Ethan adjusted his glasses and offered a half-smile that held more courage than she felt. "You've got your files?" she whispered. He patted the backpack at his feet. "Everything that remembers," he said. Their attorney, Linda Reyes, swept in with the brisk grace of a woman used to walking upstream. Her pearl earrings caught the fluorescent light. Her voice was low and anchored. "We keep it simple," she murmured, sliding into the chair. "I'll argue procedure and history. If the judge allows it, Ethan will speak to the data. We don't lead with emotion, we end with it." She glanced at him, softening. "You okay, kid?" He nodded. "Truth's the only thing that doesn't panic." Vivian managed a laugh. "Who taught you to talk like that?" "You did," he said, and that was enough to carry her across the room and into the long morning that waited. The bailiff called for order, and the room hushed like a held breath. Judge Marianne Holloway adjusted her glasses and scanned the docket. Her bench looked like a ship's prow. She looked like she knew how to steer through storms. "Case 17FC3842, the clerk announced. In the matter of guardianship and custodial authority regarding minor Ethan Langley, Rachel sat at the opposite table in a pale gray suit, her hair in a sleek twist that made her look efficient, untouched by wind. Beside her, the lawyer, from the doorway, Paul, Danner stacked thick binders with the confidence of someone who believed paper could outvote truth. "Ready for the petitioner," Danner said smoothly. "Ready for the respondent," Linda replied. Judge Holloway nodded. "Counsel, you may proceed." Danner stood and smiled at the juryless room, all polished restraint. "Your Honor, this is a straightforward matter obscured by sentiment. My client, Miss Rachel Langley, is the biological and legal mother of Ethan. She never relinquished her rights. Over the course of 11 years, she maintained contact and support." Vivian flinched. Linda's hand found hers under the table, a steady pulse against panic, and can substantiate those efforts with documentation. Danner gestured, and the paralegal wheeled up a cart that clattered with binders, each spine labeled with righteous confidence. Receipts 2011-2015, visitation logs, custodial fund statements, correspondence. He tapped the stack affectionately. "We have bank records, notarized letters, calendars, therapy logbook copies. We even have Miss Langley's travel logs, corroborated by motel invoices in Springfield and Lowell timed to her visits. He turned toward Rachel with a softness that felt staged. "Miss Langley, would you tell the court about your efforts to remain in your son's life?" Rachel took a careful breath, her voice warm with rehearsed sorrow. She spoke of birthday cards mailed every year to Maplewood Street, of cash deposits into a custodial account, of standing outside a gate at Maplewood Elementary on rainy Thursdays when Vivian wouldn't let me near. She conjured stories of brief afternoon visits, Ethan too shy to hug, but always smiling, of envelopes slid beneath the door when no one answered, of phone calls with static and a click. "And you have records of these?" Danner prompted. She nodded, lifting a glossy binder. "All of it." Danner beamed like a ringmaster. "Your Honor, we submit these documents into evidence." Linda rose calmly. "Objection, foundation, and authenticity reserved. Will address on cross." "Noted," the judge said. "They're admitted subject to your objection." Danner bowed mildly and continued weaving a timeline thick enough to lean on. He painted Vivian as well-intentioned but withholding, Ethan as a child whose mother had been kept at bay by a gatekeeper's grief. The documents glittered like sequins under bad light. When he finished, he folded his hands. "Miss Langley is not seeking to undo love, only to resume her rightful Roland, to steward the extraordinary resources now required for Ethan's welfare and future." Linda stood, the room tilting with her composure. "Your Honor, we don't argue biology, we argue reality." She moved just once, a slow turn that faced the bench squarely. Miss Langley did not parent, she did not support, she did not show up. The evidence petitioner offers is a paper moonbright, thin and false. She gestured to Vivian. "Mrs. Langley has been guardian, in fact, for 15 years. She fed him toast squares when he could not bear a broken edge. She learned his maps of sound when the world was too loud. She sat in school offices and fought for his right to be challenged. She made a home that held him safe. That is the record that matters." She let the words rest, then added, "And we can show the court that Miss Langley's records were manufactured recently and clumsily." Danner's smile tightened. "Counselor can't authenticate absence." "Luckily," Linda replied. "We can authenticate time." Judge Holloway leaned forward. "Counsel, if you have concrete rebuttal, now would be the time." Linda nodded. "We do. With the court's permission, the minor would like to present data relevant to authenticity." The judge studied Ethan over her glasses. "Mr. Langley, are you prepared to testify?" Ethan stood, slim and steady. "Yes, Your Honor. Approach." He took the stand without fanfare, set his backpack on his lap, and looked smaller than every sentence ever assigned to him. Linda's questions were gentle, scaffolding more than spotlight. "State your name." "Ethan Michael Langley." "How old are you, Ethan?" 15. "Do you understand the difference between truth and a lie?" He nodded. "A lie can be made to look still. Truth breathes." There was a soft stir in the gallery. Judge Holloway's mouth twitched, as if she might almost smile. "Ethan," Linda continued, "can you tell the court what you've built?" "A document authentication system," he said. "People call it TrueKey. It verifies whether a digital file has been altered by creating a chain of cryptographic fingerprints. If the file changes, the fingerprints change. The chain keeps a memory of itself." "And did you run Miss Langley's evidence through your system?" "Yes," he said quietly. "With the court's permission, I brought visualizations." Judge Holloway gestured to the clerk, who rolled a cart-mounted monitor into place and swiveled it toward the bench. "Proceed." Ethan unzipped his backpack, withdrew the familiar laptop, and plugged into the court's display. His hands were steady, his voice low. First, the visitation logs. The screen displayed a neat timeline, each entry a blue dot connected by a thin, orderly line. These documents were presented as contemporaneous logs from 2012 to 2018, he said. But the metadata shows a file creation date 6 weeks ago, shortly after the local news aired a segment about my software sale. He tapped a key. The blue dots blinked red, the 6-week timestamp pulsing like a heartbeat. The system cross-references embedded fonts, author IDs, and print spool artifacts. The pattern is consistent with recent compilation, not historical accumulation. Danner stood. Objection, speculation, and beyond the scope of a miner's expertise. Linda didn't bother to look at him. He's the designer of the tool being discussed. Judge Holloway raised a hand. Overruled. I'll give the testimony the weight it deserves. Ethan continued, unruffled. Next, the notary seals. 2 of the affidavits bear the seal of Delaney & Co. The Secretary of State retired that stamp in 2015 after a numbering change. The seal on these documents uses the post-2015 numbering format, but claims to be from 2012. He zoomed in. The courtroom leaned with him. It's like seeing a modern license plate in a black-and-white photograph. A few soft laughs escaped before the room corrected itself back into solemnity. Third, he said, the signatures. He split the screen, 2 images stacked like echo and source. This is my grandmother's signature from a 2011 hospital intake form. This is her signature on a custodial acknowledgement submitted by Miss Esso. Langley. He circled 3 points, identical vector curves including a pressure wobble at the V and a microfleck that repeats at the loop of the G. Natural signatures never repeat to the pixel. This one does. It's a lift. Rachel's jaw tightened. Those are coincidences, she whispered to Danner. He didn't answer. Ethan's voice softened. Small things matter. They're the easiest to hide. He brought up a new panel. Now, my records. This ledger's been running for 7 years. It logs my calendar, therapy sessions, school attendance, device locations, and bank statements only the header data, not content. He glanced at the judge. Privacy matters. Good, Judge Holloway said quietly. The screen filled with translucent layers receipts and dates braided into a quiet tapestry. There's no contact from Miss Langley after June 2010, he said. No deposits from any claimed custodial account. There are statements from the bank verifying no such account exists under my name. No geolocation hits from Miss Langley's devices near Maplewood Elementary on the days she claims to have visited the school's entry log corroborates. It tracks visitor badges. No calls from her number that lasted longer than 13 seconds here are the carrier logs obtained through counsel's subpoena. If you need verification of any of these sources, the system stores hash commitments with external timestamping services. Each timestamp binds to the next. If I had altered any of this, you would see a break. He paused, letting quiet do the work. Danner approached the monitor, trying to regain altitude. Young man, isn't it possible your system is mistaken? That it missed something? Technology fails? Sometimes, Ethan agreed. People fail more. A muffled chuckle traveled like a ripple. The judge's gavel tapped once, gentle but firm. Danner spread his hands. You're 15. Yes, Ethan said. So perhaps you don't understand the complexity of adult relationships. Memory is imperfect. Records are lost. Ethan met his gaze without heat. That's why we keep receipts. Linda rose. Your Honor, defense calls Mr. Patel of Kensington Copy and Mail. For foundation he can testify to the notarization schedules and the discontinuation of the seal. She nodded to the back. A slim man stood, hand over heart, ready to confirm. We also have a sworn statement from the Secretary of State's office affirming the seal format change and certified attendance logs from Maplewood Elementary showing no visitor badges issued to Miss Langley during the years in question. Judge Holloway turned to Danner. Counsel? Danner sighed. the air going out of him like a punctured tire. "Your Honor, we request time to—" "To what?" Linda interjected, voice like a blade wrapped in velvet. "To find a new story now that the old one has been dated?" Rachel stood abruptly. "I tried," she said, too loudly, the control breaking at the edges. "You don't know what it was like. I sent money." "To where?" Linda asked gently. "To which account? To which child?" "Because the one sitting here never saw you," Rachel faltered. "Miss Langley," the judge said, not unkindly. "You may sit." Silence settled again, this time with a different weight. The courtroom no longer felt like a place where stories were performed, but where they were measured. Linda approached the bench with a final folder, thinner than the others, and set it down as if placing a flower. "Your Honor," she said, "the law honors paper, but it also honors pattern. For 15 years, Vivian Langley has been the pattern in Ethan's life. The breakfast, the bus stop, the school forms, the medical decisions. Her name is the one on the call list. Her voice is the one that answers in the night. And today, the only documents that do not crumble under light are the ones that show the petitioner was gone." She stepped back. "We ask the court to finalize what has long been true, permanent guardianship for Vivian Langley. We also ask that the matter of falsified documents be referred for criminal investigation." Judge Holloway sat very still, hands folded, gaze lowered as if considering a fragile object she didn't want to drop. When she finally looked up, her eyes were clear. "I have heard enough." She addressed the room, voice even. "The court finds that the materials submitted by the petitioner contain demonstrable irregularities, creation dates inconsistent with claimed timelines, notary seals incompatible with the alleged years, and signatures that appear to be digital lifts. The corroborated data presented by the minor, supported by independent sources, is persuasive. The court concludes that the petitioner, Miss Rachel Langley, has submitted falsified records and provided false testimony." Vivian's breath caught. Linda's hand found her again, a quiet anchor. Ethan didn't move. He was listening the way he always did, like a scientist catching the ending of a song. Accordingly, the judge continued, "Full legal and physical guardianship of Ethan Langley is awarded to Vivian Langley, effective immediately and permanent. The court refers the matter of forged instruments and perjury to the district attorney's office for criminal investigation." The gavel struck once. It sounded like a door closing and another opening. Rachel rose, color draining and returning in violent tides. For a moment, something almost human flickered through the practiced lines of her face, regret or rage, or just the sudden collapse of a house built on paper. She gathered her sleek bag with trembling precision, then turned toward the aisle. When she reached the end of the row, she paused, as if a word might still arrive to save her. None did. In the corridor, reporters waited with microphones like lilies, but Linda steered them toward the side exit, where late sun warmed the brick and the air smelled faintly of rain. "You were extraordinary," she told Ethan, pushing open the heavy door with her shoulder. "Not because of the tech, though. Dear God, the tech, but because you never tried to hurt anyone while telling the truth." He shrugged, almost embarrassed. "Hurting people isn't data." Vivian laughed, the sound breaking and mending in the same breath. "You and your lines," she said, cupping his cheek. "You saved us." He looked at her, serious and soft all at once. "You saved me first." They stepped into the light together, the three of them a small constellation that didn't need to be bright to be seen. Maplewood Street was waiting somewhere beyond the square, the porch light, the kettle, the ordinary evening. As they reached the curb, Linda's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and arched a brow. "District Attorney wants a copy of Trukey's report. I'll handle the chain of custody." Ethan nodded. "I'll package the hashes." Vivian squinted at them, mock stern. "Translate that into grandmother." Linda grinned. "He'll put a bow on the truth." "Ah," Vivian said, satisfaction warming her voice. My favorite kind of gift. They walked on, the courthouse shrinking behind them, the day rummaging for its dusk. Somewhere a church bell rang, and Ethan glanced up as if mapping the old echo against a new sky. The world had not made itself kinder, exactly, but it had become clearer. And in that clarity, a boy, a grandmother, and a lawyer with pearl earrings moved forward, carrying a ledger that remembered, and a love that did not need to. After the trial, autumn settled softly over Maplewood Street, painting the air with the scent of apples and rain. The courthouse drama had faded into whispers, now just another headline lost in the shuffle of bigger, louder stories. But for Vivian and Ethan, life moved quietly forward, one small, steady breath at a time. Rachel Langley's name appeared in the paper only once more. Local woman sentenced to probation and community service following forgery case. The article was brief, clinical, 2 years probation. 500 hours of community service at the Haven Center for Children with Autism, a place that once had a waiting list so long Vivian used to dream of getting Ethan in when he was younger. The irony wasn't lost on her. Months later, Vivian stopped by the Haven Center to drop off donated books from the Maplewood Library. She didn't expect to see Rachel, didn't expect to see her at all. But when she turned down a quiet hallway lined with children's drawings, she heard a voice, reading softly. The classroom was small and warm, sunlight filtering through paper snowflakes hung across the window. Rachel sat on the floor, cross-legged, with 3 children leaning close around her. She held a picture book open, her voice unsteady but gentle. And the little fox realized that being different wasn't wrong, it was what made him special. One of the boys giggled. Another pressed his cheek against her shoulder. Rachel smiled faintly, the kind of smile that trembles before it learns how to stay. Her hair was tied back, her eyes shadowed, her face thinner, like someone who had been learning how to live on humility instead of air. Vivian froze in the doorway, unsure whether to turn back or step in. Rachel looked up, startled, their eyes locking for the first time in nearly a year. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. Finally, Rachel rose quietly, closing the book. "Vivian," she said, voice soft. "I didn't think you'd ever want to see me again." Vivian swallowed. "I didn't plan to." Rachel's hands tightened around the book. "They assigned me here after the sentencing. I thought it was punishment. But," she glanced at the children, now busy stacking blocks, "it's not. It's something I should have done long ago." Vivian studied hearth gray beneath her eyes, the nervous tremor in her fingers, and realized that Rachel no longer looked like the polished woman from the courtroom. She looked human again, breakable, perhaps even reachable. "I'm glad you found something that matters," Vivian said quietly. Rachel's eyes glistened. "Do you ever tell him about me?" Vivian hesitated, then shook her head. "He doesn't ask." Rachel's lips parted, then closed again. "Maybe that's for the best." Vivian nodded. "Maybe. Or maybe someday he will." The 2 women stood there, separated by years of silence and a chasm of choices. Then, unexpectedly, one of the children tugged Rachel's sleeve. "Miss Ray, finish the fox story." Rachel smiled weakly. "In a minute, sweetheart." Vivian turned toward the door. "Take care of yourself, Rachel." "I'm trying," Rachel said, almost to herself. "For the first time, I really am." Life in the Langley house grew calm again, though never ordinary. Ethan rarely spoke of the trial or his mother. He poured his focus into building something new, a company he called Mosaic Systems. When Vivian asked about the name, he said, "Because mosaics are made of broken pieces. You just have to find where each one fits." At first, it was just him and an old friend from the coding forums, a quiet young man named Theo who communicated mostly through text chat and rarely looked up from his screen. Then came Mila, a meticulous tester who hummed classical music under her breath, and Jamal, a data analyst who spoke in numbers the way poets speak in metaphors. Most of them were, like Ethan, on the autism spectrum. They don't see problems the way others do, he told Vivian one evening, showing her the small office they'd rented on Halcyon Street. We see patterns. That's our superpower. Vivian looked around, marveling at the walls covered in sticky notes, flowcharts, and sketches of data trees. And you give them a place to belong, she said. Ethan shrugged. I just give them what I needed. He didn't say more, but Vivian could feel the quiet pride beneath his words. The boy who once flinched at the sound of rain now stood at the center of his own creation, leading not with authority, but with understanding. A few months later, Vivian visited the office again, bringing a box of pastries from her favorite bakery. When she walked in, she froze at the sight of one of her former students, Emma Parkerthy girl who used to doodle stars on her math tests instead of solving equations. Emma? Vivian laughed in disbelief. You work here? Emma turned from her desk, her eyes lighting up. Mrs. Langley, you taught me in 5th grade, remember the science fair volcano that exploded too early? How could I forget? You nearly baptized the principal in vinegar, Emma laughed. Ethan hired me last month. I'm doing UX design now. Who knew all that doodling would actually help? Vivian looked around the room, every desk occupied, laughter soft but genuine, a quiet rhythm of typing and ideas moving like a pulse through the air. Some faces were familiar from her teaching years, others new. All of them carried that same spark she used to see in children who the world had underestimated. She found Ethan at the back corner, leaning over a monitor with Theo. Your grandma's here, Theo murmured without looking up. Ethan turned, smiling. You found us. I followed the trail of genius, Vivian said, setting down the pastry box. Looks like you're running your own little universe, he chuckled. We're just making tools that help people tell the truth better. Mosaic's building an accessibility platform, now data visualization for people who think differently. It's like translating complexity into kindness. Vivian's eyes softened. That sounds like something your grandfather would have said, Ethan pretended to think. Or you. She smiled, brushing a crumb from his sleeve. You've built something beautiful, Ethan. He glanced at his team, his voice quiet but certain. They built it. I just gave it shape. Later that night, as Vivian walked home under the glow of streetlights, she thought of Rachel again, of the woman reading to children who would never judge her past. Maybe redemption, like coding, was just another form of pattern recognition, seeing what was broken and choosing to rebuild anyway. At home, the porch light burned steady, as it always had. She sat by the window, watching the soft rain blur the world into watercolor shapes. In her mind, she could still hear Rachel's voice from that classroom trembling. Then tender as she read to the children about the little fox who learned that being different was its own kind of magic. Vivian smiled faintly. The world had come full circle, and somehow, in its quiet, imperfect way, it made sense. The ending and its meaning. The evening air carried the quiet hum of the city, gentle, unhurried, washed in the gold of a setting sun. Vivian parked her old sedan outside Mosaic Systems, balancing a warm container of stew and a loaf of her homemade bread. Through the glass walls of the office, she could see Ethan still at his desk, the glow from his monitor outlining him like a halo. Everyone else had gone home hours ago, typical. When she stepped inside, the faint whir of machines mixed with the smell of coffee and dust. Ethan didn't look up at first. He was lost in a sea of code, a faint smile tugging at his lips as his fingers moved across the keyboard. She stood watching for a moment this young man who had once clung to silence, now orchestrating a world that listened to him in lines and loops. Dinner break, Mr. CEO, she said, placing the food on his desk. He blinked, as if surfacing from underwater. You didn't have to drive all the way here. Vivian smiled. If I waited for you to come home, you'd starve before dessert. He chuckled, rubbing his neck. Point taken. She poured the stew into a bowl, the smell of rosemary filling the room. You know, she said softly, I used to dream about you talking like this, so full of thoughts I could barely keep up. Now you regret it? he teased. "Every other day," she said with a grin. Then, more quietly, "Mostly I'm just proud." They ate together in companionable silence, the kind that only family earns. Outside, the streetlights flickered on one by one, stretching warm reflections across the polished floor. When they'd finished, Vivian began gathering the dishes, but Ethan stopped her. "Leave it, Grandma. I'll clean up later." She laughed. "You? Cleaning up? That I have to see." He smiled but didn't answer. Instead, he turned serious, his eyes fixed on the steam rising from his bowl. "Can I tell you something?" "Always." He hesitated, words forming carefully. "I know what you gave up for me. Your friends, your freedom, the trips you wanted to take, the classes you never went back to teach. I know all of it." Vivian froze for a moment, the weight of those years pressing softly against her chest. "Ethan." He looked up, his voice steady but quiet. "You didn't have to stay, but you did, every day, even when I wasn't easy to love, especially then." Her hand trembled slightly as she set down a spoon. "Sweetheart, I didn't stay because I had to. I stayed because love doesn't walk away from what it's called to protect." He swallowed hard. "Still, I just wanted you to know that I know." She smiled, tears pricking her eyes. "Then let me tell you something, too. You were worth every day of it. Every missed trip, every sleepless night. You made my life bigger, not smaller." He looked down at the table, blinking fast, a faint laugh breaking through. "You always know how to ruin a perfectly normal evening." She chuckled softly. Emotional sabotage runs in the family. They shared a quiet smile, the kind that said everything words couldn't. After a moment, Vivian stood, brushing invisible crumbs from her dress. "I should head back before it gets too dark." Ethan nodded. "Text me when you get home? Only if you promise not to fact-check my ETA." "Deal." She leaned down, kissed the top of his head, and whispered, "Take care of that brilliant mind of yours." He looked up. "I will." Vivian turned to go, pausing by the door. "Don't stay too late," he grinned. "You've been saying that since I was 12, and you've been ignoring it since then," she replied, smiling as she stepped into the hallway. Later, as she pulled onto Maplewood Street, her phone buzzed with a message. "Ethan, thank you." Just 2 words, but they filled the car more than any song on the radio ever could. She typed back, then stopped, letting the message remain unsent. Some things didn't need reply. The road home unfolded beneath her headlights like an old memory she never grew tired of visiting. The trees along the sidewalk whispered with wind, the same way they always had, but tonight their rustle felt differentless, like routine, more like grace. She slowed at the familiar corner, the one that always made her heart ache with the echo of years gone by, but the ache was softer now, almost tender. In her rearview mirror, the lights of Mosaic Systems faded into the distant small, steady, alive. Ethan's world, born from chaos, now shining quietly against the night. When she reached her driveway, the porch light came into view, the same one she'd left burning since the day a frightened little boy first arrived at her door. It still glowed, faithful as ever, casting a golden warmth across the garden. Vivian turned off the engine and sat for a moment, hands resting on the steering wheel. Outside, the evening hummed with ordinary life crickets, wind, the faint laughter of neighbors. But in that ordinary rhythm, she heard something sacred, the sound of a life rebuilt, the sound of love that had never once needed to announce itself to be real. She smiled, stepped out of the car, and walked toward the light.